Grazie Daniel, la ringrazio. Come voi sapete, io sono Doug Trappett, vice ambasciatore all'ambasciata dell'Australia. Forse dovrei cominciare con una scusa riguardo la mia capacità a parlare in italiano. Non è meglio fare un discorso in italiano, scusa. Can I start by saying how much I welcome this seminar? My impression since arriving in Italy about 15 or 16 months ago is that the debate about these sorts of issues is not as developed or occurs as often as I would have thought before arriving here. So I think it's excellent that this sort of seminar is being held. It also seems to me that when issues concerning the Asia-Pacific are discussed here, quite understandably it turns to the issues of, the discussion turns to issues of conflict, particularly in Northeast Asia, whereas of course the overriding message from those of us in the region is that for Italy it is an area of tremendous opportunity, and we very much welcome Italy and of course Europe and NATO's participation in the region as much as possible, which I'll talk about today. I was given some questions to answer, and they were, what is Australia's view on the global importance of the Asia-Pacific in light of the Obama administration's pivot, Australia's position in regard to territorial disputes in the region, and how Australia views or would view Italy's involvement in the region, and generally a comment on the bilateral relationship. I will answer all of these questions. I thought I would start, however, with just a little statement, if you like, about where Australia sees itself in the region, the Asia-Pacific region. And I thought I would do that because often Australia is cast as a sort of odd man out in the Asia-Pacific, an unbending ally of the United States, or a country that has its interests and focus in London or Brussels or Washington DC, etc. There are elements of truth in that, but it's certainly an erroneous perception, a classification of Australia. For many years now, successive Australian governments have seen our interests, our core diplomatic relationships as being fundamentally in the Asia-Pacific region. Some 12% of our population, Australia's population, says, I am of Asian ethnicity. Our top 10 two-way trading partners for the last 20 years or so, it's always been the case that 7 or 8 countries have been within the Asia-Pacific. It's now up to 9 out of 10 countries of our top 10 trading partners are from the Asia-Pacific. The UK is the one country outside of the region. Those sorts of links, I could talk about them all day, but if you go to Australia, as my diplomatic colleague, the ambassador, has on many occasions, Asian restaurants are everywhere. Our tourism figures, tourism relationships, the number of students in Australia, the key student populations, if you like, the numbers, most are from Asian nations. So those links are everywhere. Last year, before our new government was elected, the previous government released a white paper, a major policy talking about Australia in the Asian century. Our new government has concluded, since coming to office in September, has concluded 2 free trade agreements with Korea and Japan already. Discussions are underway and hopefully will be concluded soon for a free trade agreement with China. The ambassador mentioned TTP as well, TPP I should say. Our Prime Minister's first visit overseas was to Jakarta. So this is all a long-winded way of saying we very much see ourselves as being first and foremost in the Asia-Pacific region. Implicit in all of that, I'm moving to question one now about the global importance of the Asia-Pacific, is Australia realised a long time ago, back in the 1980s, that the rise of the Asia-Pacific, if you like, the so-called 21st century, the Asia-Pacific century, was inevitable and had to be participated in fully by Australia. It follows from that very much that we'll probably hear a lot of statistics today about the rise of the Asia-Pacific, but so some statistics that I would give: by 2025, Asia will produce 50% of the world's economic output, be home to 5 of the top 10 global economies. Chinese companies will have greater market capitalisation than US companies. So it seems to me, and I know that there's charts and so on, plotting this, but the centre of the world's political gravity is moving away from Europe and into the Asia-Pacific. It follows from that, I would have thought that it's axiomatic that countries like Italy and Europe and NATO as a whole need to step up their engagement to the maximum level possible with the Asia-Pacific. Part of the reason for that is if things go wrong there, they are going to go wrong for Italy and Europe. I offer, that might sound a little bit sort of vague, but I offer, for example, some further statistics. 1/3 of the world's cargo and 2/3 of the global oil shipments pass through the Indian Ocean, as well as 80% of China's oil imports. So self-evidently, the rules need to be right in the Asia-Pacific, not just for those of us within the region, but globally as well. One thing that I wanted to mention there, as an Australian diplomat here in Rome, is that one of the things that interests us about the Ukraine crisis at the moment is absolutely it should be occupying the time of your government's ministers and media and so on. But the one thing that we want to see coming out of it is not an inward-looking Europe and NATO and Italy that just starts focusing on, the Russian question and where this conflict is going to go, but maintains its gaze, above the horizon, if you like, and still focused on the Asia-Pacific and contributing as much as possible to the defence and security debates in our part of the world. We don't seek, Australia doesn't seek a NATO presence in the Asia-Pacific, but we certainly seek engagement and discussion and input of views. On that note, and I know the ambassador spoke about this in his speech, but I endorse it as well. There's been a lot of progress on the security and cooperation and dialogue in the Asia-Pacific for 20 years now, and the ambassador mentioned, the EAS, APEC as well, the Shanghai dialogue as well, defence ministers meeting, and so on. But really, those fora are quite sort of underdeveloped in terms of their, the level of integration that has occurred. And I think if you look at the Indian Ocean, and I just gave figures now on the amount of global produce and oil flowing through the Indian Ocean, the existing security structures there are very thin indeed. To the best of my knowledge, there's no real, there is the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, for example, but there's no real sort of long established fora there for a strong sort of dialogue on the sorts of challenges, maritime security challenges in that area. And yet it would seem a perfect place where Europe and Asia-Pacific intersects and can tackle a lot of those sorts of challenges. Australia believes very much so that the growth of the Asia, and now I'm sort of getting into question 2 about Australia's position on territorial disputes, but our view is that the growth and stability of the Asia-Pacific since World War II has been very much to good management by governments in the region, first and foremost, but at the heart of it has been the US military presence and the maritime security and other security guarantees it has provided for those countries to get on with the job of establishing strong, resilient economies that are integrated with each other. However, with that growth, there is, as you're well aware, changes occurring. China's military expenditure doubles every 5 years, is likely to equal the United States by 2030. Indian defence expenditure up by 17%. Vietnamese expenditure up by 34%. I hope that's an accurate quote. Indonesia up by 300% since 2006. From an Australian perspective, as you would expect, we have major interests at stake here. 40% of our two-way trade travels to Northeast Asia. 60% of our merchandise trade exports pass through the South China Sea. Our approach to all of this, very much in line, happily, with what the Ambassador calls for in the region, is we're trying with our friends and partners in the Asia-Pacific to create an environment as much as possible where there is dialogue and cooperation on regional security matters such as the future of the DPRK, Korean Peninsula, and developments in the South China Sea. And within the East Asia Summit, in particular since the United States has joined the East Asian Summit, focusing on not just those sort of key security issues, but maritime security, things like environmental protection and food security as well. And as I say, the sort of overarching goal here is to create a rules-based system with common codes of behaviour. Again, exactly the sorts of thing that the Ambassador mentioned in his speech. One of the more practical ways we think we're doing this is in recent years, and as part of the pivot by the Obama administration into the region, is Australia is now hosting in our north, which of course, as you all know, is very close to Indonesia and southern Philippines. Our most northern cities are closer to Manila and Jakarta than they are to cities like Sydney and Adelaide and Melbourne in our south. We've started hosting rotating deployments of US military forces in our north. And we believe that the presence of those forces, among other things, helps build that security cooperation architecture. If you look at what happened in response to Typhoon Haifan in the Philippines late last year, that was an example of US forces in the region and Australian forces, regional military forces as well, cooperating to create a rapid response to that challenge, and we would like to see more of that. I won't talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Ambassador has moved on that, but I certainly support his view that this is another mechanism for bringing all of the countries in the region closer together. At the same time, we're moving ahead in our relationship with China. In 2012, we established an annual leaders talks to complement high-level military talks. Both nations conduct maritime exercises as well, and China is our largest two-way trading partner and increasingly a major investment partner as well. So implicit in that is we don't see a region of, distinct choices. We see a region that complements each other, but which must develop these structures for increased cooperation and rules. Where does Italy, question 3, where does Italy fit in all of this? As I said at the beginning, well, we welcome Italian involvement as much as possible. At a sort of conceptual level, from an Australian perspective, obviously with our two countries being democracies based on rule of law, similar societies in a sort of general perspective, the fit seems to be a very good one for as much Italian participation as possible. Australia, dare I say it, is a very good starting point for Italian engagement in the region. We have 911,000 people in Australia say, I am of Italian ethnicity. Our population is 23 million, so 900,000 say, I have an Italian background. So the sort of links, if you like, and opportunities and the goodwill that exists for Italy working in Australia is strong. More than that, Italian companies, be it in engineering, infrastructure, construction, or which of course fit very well into the minerals and energy, the massive minerals and energy resources that Australia has. Italian companies are very well placed and are doing better and better and taking much more interest in Australia and its resources. So hopefully over the next 5 years, and as I say, it is already happening, but over the next 5 years, a lot of those large Italian companies like Astaldi, like Salini, Gella, are starting to work in Australia, and they will bring a lot of political interest into our country. And there's already 8,000 or so Italian students studying in Australia as well. I think Australia, given that sort of background that we have and fit for Italy and Italian companies and people, there's a big increase in tourism traffic as well between the two countries. Australia seems like a good launch point, a good starting point to go into the Asia-Pacific region, to establish in Australia and go further into the region and create that sort of level of integration that certainly we would hope for and are seeking. And the same goes with defence and security. Finmeccanica are paying a lot more attention to Australia. Australia is buying 10 C-27J planes off Italy worth about 1.2 billion Australian dollars. We will be partners in the Joint Strike Fighter project. Australia will purchase around about 70 JSF. Finmeccanica has won contracts for communications in Australia recently, and so forth. I'll finish with just a short comment. ASEM in Milan this year, which will obviously be a very good opportunity for Italy to focus to a greater extent on the Asia-Pacific region. Prime Minister Renzi will visit Australia in November as part of the G20 Leaders Summit. I think all of these are a good, starting point for a higher level of Italian engagement in the Asia-Pacific region, and with some sort of clever and energetic diplomacy, we can see a higher level of engagement. Thank you.